There are moments when a woman looks at you completely differently than she looks at anyone else in the room, and most men never catch it because they're taught to look for obvious signs: flirting, compliments, clear invitations. But real interest rarely announces itself that loudly. It hides in small, involuntary details most men are never trained to notice, tiny signals the conscious mind doesn't even control. Here's the mistake almost every man makes. He waits for certainty. He waits for her to say something clear, to make the first obvious move, to remove all doubt before he allows himself to believe she might actually be interested. But female attraction rarely works that way. It leaks out sideways, through body language, through timing, through the small things she does without even realizing she's doing them. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you can miss it completely, standing right in front of someone who's already imagining far more than she'd ever admit out loud. Before we go further, let's be clear about what this is not. This is not about assuming interest where there is none. This is not permission to misread politeness as attraction, or to pressure anyone based on a list of signs. This is not manipulation, and it's not a game. What you're about to learn is grounded in real psychology, how attraction shows up in the body before it ever shows up in words, and how to read those signals with maturity, respect, and emotional intelligence instead of desperation. By the end of this video, you'll know 9 silent signals that reveal genuine interest, the subtle behaviors psychology consistently links to real attraction, the kind she may not even be fully aware of herself. And stay until the end, because sign number 9 is the one most men completely overlook, even though it might be the most telling of them all. Before we continue, everything you learn on this channel, every insight, every explanation, is a compass. It points you in the right direction, but a compass doesn't move your feet for you. Eventually, you have to actually make the journey. That journey happens inside the community. It's where men move past just absorbing ideas and start actually living them, proving to themselves that they can stay grounded, regulate their emotions, and carry a presence that's real, not rehearsed. This isn't something you borrow for a while. It's something you keep. One decision, made once, and every lesson, every future course, every resource we ever build, becomes permanently yours. Nothing to renew, nothing that expires. Just one door, and once you walk through it, it stays open for good. If you're ready to stop almost changing and actually start, the link is waiting below. Now, let's get into it. Sign number 1. She remembers the small details. Here's the first sign, and it's easy to miss because it doesn't look like flirting at all. It looks like memory. When a woman brings up something you mentioned once, in passing, weeks ago, a small detail about your work, an offhand comment about your childhood dog, a joke you made that wasn't even that memorable, that's not just good listening. That's the brain doing something specific with information it has decided matters. Most men assume good memory is just a personality trait, something some people simply have and others don't. But psychology tells a different story. What we remember is heavily influenced by what our brain has flagged as emotionally significant. We forget most conversations within days, but certain details, tied to people we're drawn to, get filed differently, stored more vividly, and resurface more easily than they should. The mistake most men make here is treating this as insignificant, brushing past it as coincidence or simple politeness. But think about how selective memory actually is. She doesn't remember what her coworker said last Tuesday. She doesn't remember the small talk from every other conversation she's had that week. But she remembers your comment about wanting to travel to Portugal someday, and she brings it up 3 weeks later, almost casually, as if it just occurred to her. That's not casual. That's her brain quietly prioritizing you above the noise of everyone else she talks to. The psychological explanation is rooted in something called selective attention. The brain filters an overwhelming amount of daily information, and what gets through, what gets stored, what gets easily recalled later, is shaped by emotional relevance in the moment it was received. If she was genuinely uninterested, your comment would have been filtered out along with everything else forgettable that day. Think of two women in the same conversation. One nods along, engaged in the moment, but by next week she couldn't tell you what you talked about. The other brings up something you said weeks later, unprompted, like it mattered enough to keep. The difference isn't politeness. It's what her mind decided was worth holding on to. The takeaway. Pay attention to what she remembers, not just what she says. Memory doesn't lie the way words sometimes do, and if she's holding on to details about you long after the conversation ended, some part of her already decided you were worth remembering. Sign number 2. She mirrors your body language without realizing it. Here's a sign that happens entirely below conscious awareness, which is exactly what makes it so reliable. Mirroring. Watch closely the next time you're talking to a woman who's genuinely drawn to you. When you lean forward, she leans forward. When you cross your arms, she crosses hers. When you pick up your drink, there's a strange delay, and then she picks up hers too, almost like an echo. Most people have no idea they're doing this, which is exactly why it's such an honest signal. It bypasses the part of the brain that filters and performs and comes straight from something more instinctive. The common misconception is that body language only matters when it's obvious. Prolonged eye contact, playing with hair, the classic signs everyone already knows to look for. But mirroring is quieter than all of that and far harder to fake convincingly. It's rooted in something psychologists call limbic synchrony. The emotional part of the brain, the limbic system, naturally wants to align itself with people it feels safe and connected to. It's the same mechanism behind why couples who've been together for years start finishing each other's sentences, or why close friends unconsciously adopt similar postures during deep conversation. It's connection, expressed physically, before it's ever expressed verbally. Here's why this matters so much. Mirroring can't really be forced convincingly, not for long. You can tell someone to copy your body language as a trick, but genuine mirroring has a rhythm to it. A slight delay, a natural flow, movements that sync without looking rehearsed. That natural timing is what separates real subconscious interest from someone consciously performing interest they don't actually feel. Think of two different women in conversation with you. One sits rigidly, body angled slightly away, movements independent of yours, technically friendly but physically disconnected. The other, without noticing, starts matching your energy. Same pace of movement, same shifts in posture, drawn subtly into your physical rhythm like gravity pulling her in. The second woman's body is telling you something her words haven't caught up to yet. The takeaway. Watch the rhythm between you, not just the words being exchanged. When someone's body starts moving in sync with yours without them noticing, that's not coincidence. That's her nervous system quietly deciding it feels safe, connected, and drawn toward yours. Sign number 3. Her voice changes when she talks to you. Here's a sign most people notice without ever consciously naming it. The tone of her voice shifts when she's speaking to you, even if the words themselves sound completely ordinary. It might get slightly softer, slightly higher, a little more animated, or sometimes the opposite, quieter, more careful, almost like she's choosing each word with more attention than usual. The specific shift varies from woman to woman, but the underlying principle stays the same. Vocal tone is one of the hardest things for the human body to consciously control, which makes it one of the most honest indicators of genuine emotional response. The common misconception is that voice doesn't matter as much as words or body language, that it's just background noise to the actual content of what's being said. But psychology tells a very different story. Vocal pitch and tone are largely regulated by the autonomic nervous system, the same system responsible for heart rate, breathing, and instinctive emotional reactions. You can control your words carefully. You can control your facial expression, at least partially. but controlling the subtle pitch and rhythm of your voice in real time, especially around someone who genuinely affects you, is far harder to fake convincingly for long. This is why so many women don't even realize their own voice changes around someone they're drawn to. It's not a conscious performance. It's the nervous system leaking real emotional arousal, not necessarily sexual, but genuine heightened attention and interest, into something as basic and involuntary as the sound of her own voice. Think of a woman talking to a coworker about a scheduling conflict, flat, efficient, purely functional tone. Now picture that same woman, minutes later, talking to someone she's genuinely drawn to about something equally mundane, like weekend plans. Suddenly there's warmth in it. A slight lift, more energy woven through ordinary words that shouldn't carry that much life on their own. The content barely changed. The delivery changed completely. The takeaway: listen past the words to how they're actually being said. A shift in tone, warmth, or rhythm that only shows up around you and nowhere else in her day is her nervous system revealing something her conscious mind hasn't fully admitted yet, even to herself. Sign number 4. She finds small reasons to touch you. Here's a sign that's easy to misread if you're not paying close attention to the pattern behind it. Small, seemingly incidental touch that keeps happening more than statistics would explain. A hand on your arm while she's laughing at something you said. A light touch on your shoulder to get your attention, even when your attention was already on her. Brushing past you a little closer than the space actually required. Individually, each of these means almost nothing. Repeated consistently, specifically with you, they start telling a very different story. The common misconception is that casual touch is universal, that some people are just naturally touchy, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything specific about you. And sometimes that's true. But psychology draws a clear distinction between generalized touchiness, which stays consistent across everyone someone interacts with, and selective touch, which concentrates disproportionately around one particular person. The way to tell the difference isn't whether she touches people at all. It's whether she touches you noticeably more than she touches everyone else in the same setting, under the same circumstances. This matters because touch triggers something physiologically real. Even brief casual physical contact releases oxytocin, the same neurochemical involved in bonding and connection. Most people aren't consciously calculating this when they reach out and touch someone's arm mid-laugh. It's instinctive, an unconscious reach toward connection, toward closing a small gap that already feels comfortable to close. The brain doesn't produce oxytocin for people who feel neutral or unremarkable. It produces it for people who already register as significant. Think of a woman standing in a group of friends, laughing at something genuinely funny. Watch where her hand goes. If it lands briefly on multiple people equally, that's just her natural expressiveness. But if it consistently, disproportionately lands on you, arm, shoulder, forearm, even briefly, while everyone else gets words and eye contact but not touch, that pattern is not random. It's selective, and selective almost never happens by accident. The takeaway: don't read one touch as meaningful. Read the pattern. If physical contact keeps finding its way to you specifically, more than it finds its way to anyone else around her, that repetition is the signal, not the single moment, but the consistency underneath it. Sign number 5. She gets nervous in ways she can't fully hide. Here's a sign that seems to contradict everything else on this list, and that's exactly why it's so important to understand correctly. Sometimes attraction doesn't look like comfort at all. Sometimes it looks like nervousness. A slight stumble in her words around you that doesn't happen when she talks to anyone else. Fidgeting with her hair, her ring, her sleeve, small repetitive movements that seem to come out of nowhere. A laugh that comes a half second too early, slightly too big for what you actually said. These aren't signs of discomfort in the way people usually assume. They're often signs of something entirely different, genuine emotional activation that her body hasn't quite learned to regulate around you yet. The common misconception is that real interest should feel smooth, confident, effortless, that if someone is genuinely drawn to you, they'll be relaxed and articulate, not fumbling over their words. But psychology tells a more complicated story. When the brain registers someone as significant, especially someone it's still trying to figure out, it activates the same nervous system response associated with mild stress, increased heart rate, slightly heightened alertness, a kind of internal static that can spill out as nervous energy rather than composed confidence. This is why some of the most genuine attraction looks clumsy instead of smooth, especially early on, before familiarity has had time to settle the nervous system down. Here's the key distinction. This isn't fear, and it isn't discomfort from feeling unsafe. It's activation. The body registering that something about this interaction matters more than a neutral, low-stakes conversation would. A woman who is completely indifferent to you doesn't experience this kind of physiological response because indifference doesn't spike the nervous system the way genuine interest does. Think of a woman who speaks to a stranger asking for directions. Calm, clear, unremarkable, completely regulated. Now picture that same woman around someone she's genuinely drawn to, suddenly talking slightly faster, laughing slightly more, touching her hair without noticing she's doing it. The stranger got her baseline. You got something her nervous system couldn't quite smooth over. The takeaway. Don't mistake nervousness for disinterest. Sometimes the fumbling, the slightly too quick laugh, the fidgeting that only shows up around you specifically, is her body registering significance her composure hasn't caught up to yet. Sign number 6. She asks questions that aren't really about logistics. Here's a sign that hides in plain sight because it sounds practical, even boring on the surface. The questions she asks that seem to be about scheduling or plans, but are actually about something else entirely. What are you doing this weekend? Are you going to be at that thing on Friday? Do you usually work late? On paper, these look like ordinary functional questions. But listen closely to when they happen and how often, because psychology suggests these aren't really about gathering information. They're about gathering access. The common misconception is that questions like this are just casual conversation filler, the kind of thing people ask everyone to keep a conversation moving. And sometimes that's exactly what they are. But there's a meaningful difference between a question asked to fill silence and a question asked because the answer genuinely matters to future plans. The tell isn't the question itself, it's what she does with the information afterward. Does she seem to remember your answer later? Does she reference it when making her own plans? Does the timing of her question line up suspiciously well with moments when she could adjust her own schedule based on what you say? This connects to something psychologists call information seeking as an attachment behavior. When someone is genuinely invested in another person, their brain starts quietly gathering data that could be useful for closing distance, whether that's physical proximity, shared plans, or future overlap. It's not usually a calculated strategy. It's an instinctive impulse to keep tabs on the possibility of being near someone who matters, dressed up in the harmless language of small talk. Think of a coworker who asks about your weekend purely out of politeness, forgets your answer by Monday, and never brings it up again. Now think of someone who asks the same question, but 3 days later casually mentions she ended up going to the same neighborhood you told her about, or asks a follow-up about how it went. That second person wasn't just being polite. She was quietly tracking something, and her curiosity had a purpose underneath the casual tone. The takeaway. Pay attention to which questions get remembered and acted on, not just asked. When someone's logistics questions consistently lead back to moments of overlap with you, that's not coincidence. That's her quietly engineering more chances to be near you, one ordinary question at a time. Sign number 7. She teases you more than she teases anyone else. Here's a sign that often gets completely misread, because on the surface it can look like the opposite of interest. Teasing, playful jabs, light sarcasm aimed specifically at you. Most men assume attraction should look like sweetness, agreement, constant validation. So when a woman pokes fun at something you said, challenges you playfully, or gives you a hard time about something small, it's easy to interpret that as her simply being difficult, or worse, not that interested. But psychology tells a very different story about what teasing actually represents. The common misconception is that teasing signals annoyance or indifference. In reality, playful teasing requires a level of comfort and engagement that indifference simply doesn't produce. You don't invest energy crafting a witty jab at someone you don't care about. You just stay polite and disengaged. Teasing takes attention. It takes noticing something specific enough about you to turn into a joke, and it takes enough emotional safety to risk a little friction, trusting that you'll take it well instead of getting genuinely hurt. That combination, attentiveness plus risk-taking, is a much stronger indicator of investment than simple politeness ever is. There's also a deeper psychological layer here, something researchers call playful testing. Teasing is often an unconscious way of probing how someone handles pressure, humor, and light conflict, because those reactions reveal character in a way that pure agreement never could. A woman genuinely drawn to you may unconsciously want to see how you respond when things aren't perfectly smooth, whether you get defensive, whether you laugh along, whether you tease her back. That back and forth becomes its own form of intimacy, a private rhythm that doesn't exist with people she treats with flat, careful politeness. Think of a woman who's unfailingly nice and agreeable to a man she has zero romantic interest in, pleasant, smooth, forgettable. Now, think of a woman who gives you a hard time about being late, mocks your music taste, rolls her eyes at your jokes, but keeps engaging anyway. That friction isn't distance. It's a much more personal, much more textured form of attention than polite agreement could ever be. The takeaway: don't mistake playful teasing for disinterest. When someone consistently chooses to spar with you instead of simply agreeing with you, that's often a sign she feels safe enough and interested enough to actually engage with who you are instead of just being nice to keep the peace. So let's bring all of this together, because understanding these signs is only useful if you know what to actually do with them. None of this was about chasing certainty, and it was never about assuming interest where none exists. Attraction rarely announces itself in obvious, comfortable ways. It leaks out sideways, through memory, through rhythm, through nervousness she can't fully control, through the small, involuntary things her conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. But here's the mature correction that matters more than any single sign on this list. These signals are meant to build awareness, not entitlement. Noticing that someone might be drawn to you isn't permission to pressure, assume, or push past what she's actually communicating with her words and her boundaries. Real emotional intelligence means holding both truths at once, paying attention to what her body and behavior reveal, while still respecting that she gets to move at her own pace, on her own terms. The takeaway that ties everything together: a woman who's genuinely interested rarely needs to say it outright, because her attention already shows it, in what she remembers, how her body responds, the questions she asks, the way she teases you instead of staying politely distant. Learning to notice that isn't about decoding her to gain an advantage. It's about becoming present enough, attentive enough, and secure enough in yourself to actually see someone clearly, which, more often than not, is exactly the kind of man worth being drawn to in the first place. If this helped you see these small moments differently, let me know in the comments which sign hit closest to something you've actually experienced. And if you want more real psychology like this, subscribe, because we're just getting started.